afternoon and welcome. I'm Nadia Malek, Chairman of Off the Record, and on behalf of the Board of Governors of OTR and the Board of Directors of the Foreign Policy Association, I would like to welcome you to this special joint lecture. I'd also like to extend a special warm welcome to the students from Hunter College High School and from the cadets from West Point who are in attendance today. Thank you for joining us. Let me remind everyone about house rules. Please turn off cell phones. After Prince Turki's remarks, we look forward to an engaging Q&A. Please wait for a microphone before asking your very brief question. We will end promptly at 2 p.m., and this joint lecture is on the record. And now it's my pleasure to introduce His Royal Highness Prince Turki bin Faisal Al Saud, a seasoned diplomat and a key player in the region for more than 4 decades. He is known for his tempered, direct voice on some of the world's most pressing issues and for his efforts in fostering better relations between the West and Saudi Arabia. Prince Turki was head of the Saudi intelligence for 25 years, the kingdom's ambassador to the United States and the UK, and currently serves as the chairman of the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies in Riyadh. Add to these extraordinary accomplishments, he brings the perspective of being the son of the late King Faisal, the 3rd king of Saudi Arabia, and the brother of the late Turki Al Faisal, the longest-standing foreign minister in history. Now I'm missing a page. It's an important page. Well, Prince Turki offers a very nuanced perspective to what's happening in the region, and we're very delighted to have him here, and we look forward to your perspective and your remarks. Thank you, Prince Turki, and welcome.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. I hope I didn't miss any pages. And thank you, Ms. Nadia Malik and the Foreign Policy Association for inviting me to share with you my thoughts on what is going on in our troubled part of the world and how Saudi Arabia is looking at it. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, the conflict-cursed Middle East is facing many challenges, living many ongoing crises, and encountering existential threats. Talking about such challenges, crises, and threats is a topic that is broad and complex, considering the dramatic events taking place in the region. Nowadays, uncertainty is the prevailing order in the Middle East. The speed and nature of unleashed events in the last 6 years are changing the dynamics of internal, regional, and international politics of the region. It is still too early to know or to determine the result of this unfolding process, but no doubt that such changes will create a new strategic environment, offer new opportunities, and pose new challenges to the nations in the region. Therefore, all are struggling to preserve themselves and to avoid looming anarchy, and if possible, to take advantage of the situation to reach a peaceful and stable future. In this respect, Saudi Arabia is not an exception. One of the most dangerous outcomes of the prevailing uncertainty which threatens the future of the region and all of its nation-states is the vacuum that widens every day because of the crumbling order and social contracts in certain Arab countries. This vacuum is responsible for unleashing all kinds of political, social, religious, forces, the rise of non-state actors, and for opening the door to all kinds of interferences that complicate finding indigenous solutions to indigenous crises. Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya are issues at hand, as is Palestine. The outcome of these upheavals so far does not offer any safeguard to a bright future. It is the responsibility of leading powers in the region and the world to manage such situations to guarantee the birth of healthy and peaceful national and regional orders. Because of history and mutual interest and benefit, the United States has a special responsibility to lead in this respect. Saudi Arabia, ladies and gentlemen, is a major actor in regional and international affairs, and therefore the security and stability of the region and the regional order has always been a priority and a basic determinant to its foreign policy and its national security. It is bound to lead in this respect. Saudi Arabia views the changes in our region as domestic upheavals driven mainly by domestic factors. But at the same time, we are cautious about the outcome on regional stability because the region is already weighed down by a heavy load of protracted problems complicated by Israeli and Iranian policies. Saudi Arabia bases its policy on a set of principles that clearly explain where Saudi Arabia stands and its attitudes towards such crises and their regional implications. First, Saudi Arabia believes in the concept that legitimacy of any government is derived from its own people. It is the duty of any government to protect and promote the rights, dignity, safety, and welfare of its citizens. Therefore, Saudi Arabia had and will support developments that make governments more responsive to the demands of their people and more able to meet their aspirations. Second, we strongly believe in the inviolability of the Arab nation-state system and see it as the best means to serve the interests of the Arab people. Hence, Saudi Arabia stands against any civil strife or external interventions that threaten the national unity, territorial integrity, and the social fabric of any Arab country. Anarchy, chaos, and disorder are not in the interests of the people or the internal and external peace and security. In this respect, our only interest is that countries that have witnessed dramatic changes begin to stabilize and proceed to a brighter future. Third, we believe that transnational ideologies, whatever their manifestations, that do not recognize and admit the existence of nation-states constitute a major threat to the national and regional order. Fourth, we believe in the importance of having the best possible relations with all Arab countries based on mutual respect to our independence and sovereignty and working through regional multilateral institutions such as the Arab League, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the United Nations to preserve the stability and security that every country needs to achieve any kind of development or progress. And that also works with non-Arab countries. Fifth, Saudi Arabia believes in international law and international treaties and conventions, and in the role of international bodies in implementing such rules and norms to preserve the regional and international peace, and therefore it complies with and respects such rules and institutions. Based on these guidelines, we see that security and stability are a priority, regardless of where the dust of continuing crisis settles. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge of Iran's policy behavior and its revolutionary syndrome is a continuing security concern. There are overwhelming issues with Iran. Its scheme to acquire nuclear weapons, its occupation of the 3 islands of the United Arab Emirates, and its persistent meddling in the affairs of Arab states and sectarianizing their polity. As for the issue of nuclear weapons, on countless occasions, we have reiterated that Iran, like all other countries, has the right to pursue its schemes in developing nuclear technology for peaceful use. But at the same time, we continue to insist that Iran should give up its goal of acquiring nuclear weapons, support the creation of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and abide by all the requirements and obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty regime. We did not see this issue as a regional one only, but as an international issue, and we have supported the negotiations of the P5+1 with Iran in the hope of securing the termination of Iranian military nuclear activities. It is our hope that the agreement of last year will ensure the termination of Iran's nuclear ambitions. But if after the termination of the agreement in 15 years' time, Iran persists in its nuclear arms ambitions, others in the region will be compelled to pursue policies that can lead to more proliferation and therefore more insecurity and instability. Saudi Arabia will be watching the way the agreement is implemented and how it reflects on Iranian behavior. It is unfortunate to report to you that Iran, because of this agreement, has intensified and escalated its bullying of the region. On the second issue, that of Iran's occupation of the Emirati Islands, we support the United Arab Emirates' position and have urged Iran to accept a ruling from the International Court of Justice. On the third issue, that of Iran's inserting itself into the domestic politics of Arab countries, there can be no flexibility. Sectarianizing our region is no less threatening and destructive than nuclear weapons. Iran should look in the mirror and see its behavior since 1979 and who is behind igniting such destructive trends. Nothing but Iran's revolutionary syndrome is behind all of this. A thesis begets its antithesis. Therefore, Iran must rethink its Arab policies. Funding non-state sectarian entities in Lebanon, Iraq, Bahrain, Yemen, and Syria to destabilize their national unity and social fabric will not serve anyone's interests. Saudi Arabia looks at Iran and considers what is to come, and we can only hope that the people of that nation will encourage their leaders to take a wiser and safer route than the one they now seem bent upon traveling, much to the detriment of themselves and others. Destabilizing neighbors is not a guarantee of regional dominance and influence. It is a recipe for self-defeat. The grand project of Pax Iranica is doomed because it is based on sectarianism and lust for hegemony. We have been extending our hands to Iran for the last 3 decades, and we will continue to do so. But we will never tolerate its interference in our affairs and its destructive policies in our region. As for the crisis in Syria, ladies and gentlemen, it has spilled over and threatens its neighborhood. Saudi Arabia received 2.5 million Syrians since 2011. We don't treat them as refugees to be housed in tents. Over 500,000 have chosen to stay and were given residency permits that include medical care and schooling for their children. The rest have chosen to move on to other countries. In Europe and America, however, the Syrian refugees are still an unfolding story. The violence in Syria has reached unbearable levels of violence, killing, destruction, and all forms of human suffering. The international community has so far failed to address this crisis in a rational way, and it is unfortunately becoming an issue of power politics between great powers. A peaceful solution of the crisis that preserves the unity, sovereignty, and stability of Syria and achieves the aspirations of the Syrian people is the goal of all. But this will not be attainable without real international pressure and achieving a balance of military power between the regime and the opposing forces. Using the threat of force and the submission of the Syrian regime to the demand of ridding itself from chemical weapons proved the feasibility of such an option. However, Saudi Arabia is not warmongering or happy to see the destruction and human suffering there. And we have wished from the beginning that Assad had listened to the voice of his people and the voice of wisdom to avoid all of this. Alas, he led his country to this disastrous situation and could do so by the lack of international will. In this respect, all efforts to find peaceful solutions failed, and no promising initiative is on the horizon. As we see, after 1 year of Russian military intervention, nothing has changed, but more destruction and more killing and more complexity to the whole situation. Furthermore, it is polarizing the international community with the risk of escalating into an international confrontation. Saudi Arabia will go to the end with the Syrian people in finding a peaceful solution reflecting their aspirations and preserving the unity and sovereignty of their country. In Yemen, ladies and gentlemen, the situation impacts the national security of Saudi Arabia directly. Stability and tranquility of Yemen has always been a national strategic interest for Saudi Arabia due to geographical, historical, demographic, and strategic factors. Preserving peace and security and empowering the Yemeni people with a friendly political regime that keeps the national balance within Yemen were always a Saudi priority. For the last 5 decades, Saudi Arabia invested more than $60 billion in Yemen to achieve stability and peace by helping Yemen to develop its own infrastructure in all fields of development. In addition, Saudi Arabia has over the years hosted millions of Yemenis whose remittances contribute greatly to the well-being of a large segment of Yemeni society. The 2011 revolution could have led Yemen also to the verge of collapse and becoming another Syria or Libya. Saudi Arabia and its sister states of the Gulf Cooperation Council came with an initiative that secured the abdication of Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh, transitional institutions, and a well-defined political path toward a new social and political order. All Yemeni political and social forces participated in the national dialogue that produced agreed-upon principles and procedures to move forward toward a united and peaceful future. However, the Houthis, one of the religious and political forces participating in the national dialogue, armed with weapons and Iranian support, and the forces loyal to the former president, took advantage of the turmoil to write a different future for Yemen. By hijacking the Yemeni state, the Houthis took Yemen to an uncertain future. The ideological enmity of this armed militia to Saudi Arabia and the legitimate transitional government in Yemen, breaking the national balance, and the failure of all attempts by the United Nations to broker an agreement with them to save the state and its institutions, left Saudi Arabia and its allies with no alternative but to save Yemen and to free it from this gang-minded militia. War was never an alternative for Saudi Arabia, but allowing the Houthis to get away with their agenda threatens not only peace and security in Yemen, but the whole Arabian Peninsula and the Red Sea. Supporting the legitimate leadership in Yemen is a noble cause that will save Yemen and the rest of the peninsula. Saudi Arabia is not at war with Yemen, but it is supporting the internationally recognized legitimate government of Yemen against a sectarian militia and a power-hungry ex-president, and to reclaim its rightful place among the community of nations. We have encouraged the legitimate government of Yemen to reach a peaceful solution with its adversaries, and it did. It has been negotiating with them under United Nations auspices to implement Security Council Resolution 2216, demanding the Houthis to withdraw from all seized areas and to relinquish all seized arms, and established an embargo on the Houthis and forces loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. All the rounds of peace talks have failed to bring about a peaceful end to this crisis. The latest round ended days ago, and the Houthis fired a missile at the holy city of Mecca. What more will those who support them, primarily Iran, need to recognize them for what they are? A band of vicious, immoral, and bloodthirsty criminals. Ladies and gentlemen, terrorism remains an important threat. It is not just fahish, my name for the obscenity that would claim Islam for itself, or Al-Qaeda that continue to threaten the region. There are also various emerging and re-emerging non-state actors who are moving in to take advantage of power vacuums created by shifting political dynamics. The failure of the consequences of the invasion of Iraq and the failure of the international community and regional powers to deal seriously with the situation in Syria led to the emergence of the so-called Islamic State, or Daesh. I call it fahish, because fahish in Arabic, ladies and gentlemen, means obscene. And with it emerged a new wave of terrorism. The ideology of fahish is transnational by its nature, like that of the leadership in Iran, and therefore it constitutes a threat to the concept of nation-state in our region. Saudi Arabia is not exceptional in facing this threat and is targeted by it. We have countered and defeated Al-Qaeda, and I am confident that we will defeat Fahish. We should work together to stamp out this scourge of individuals who feel it is their right to visit heinous violence upon others in the name of false and destructive ends. However, whatever the geographical or the geopolitical changes in the region may be, they will never change the nature of the overlooming challenge of far longer gestation, a situation that lies at the center of so many difficulties faced by our region, namely the plight of the Palestinian people. Solving the Palestinian and Arab-Israeli conflict is imperative to a peaceful region. The responsibility for continued failure in reaching a just solution to this just cause rests squarely on Israel and its supporters in the world. Israel's ambitious colonization of Palestine and persecution of the Palestinian people are no less doomed than the Iranian ambition. In conclusion, during the past 4 decades, Saudi Arabia and its sister monarchies in the Gulf and the Arab world have succeeded through diplomacy, international alliances, and internal cohesion in preserving the relative security and stability in the region. Through such means, we can still deal with the occurring crises facing our region. However, the absence of world leadership and the reluctance of world powers to act responsibly is allowing the continued deterioration of the situation in the Middle East. Let us hope that the world come to its senses soon. And the final few words about JASTA, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, and a call to the President-elect of the United States. The implications and unintended consequences of JASTA are broad and far-reaching. To amend the basis of sovereign immunity, the U.S. Congress has taken steps that will bring significant harm to the international system. Most members of the international community, including the European Union, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Arab League, and the Gulf Cooperation Council, oppose JASTA because of its consequences on the principles of sovereign immunity. Over 15 countries have already voiced their concern or signaled their intent to pass similar reciprocal measures. Given the presence that the US has worldwide, such reciprocal measures will most likely affect US interests, including the fate of servicemen and women and diplomats. The widely accepted principle of sovereign immunity has governed the international community for centuries. Without sovereign immunity, no country, including the United States, can conduct its affairs effectively. The Obama administration and the US State Department understand the damage that JASTA would bring to international order. And that is why the President vetoed it. It is also why the President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Director of National Intelligence have all expressed their concerns and opposition to it. If the principle of sovereign immunity is threatened, investor confidence in the United States economy will naturally be reduced. It will certainly have a detrimental effect on the bilateral relations and the ongoing cooperation that the US has with its closest allies, including cooperation in countering terrorism. And to you, Mr. Donald Trump, I say, before you take the oath of office, pack a bag and visit your friends in the Middle East. You know that they wish the United States well. They will share with you their concerns and ask you for your views. Such face-to-face encounters will expose you to ideas that are unsullied by the opinions of so-called experts who are driven by agendas that have not served your country well since 1948. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. I do ask that you please wait for a microphone before asking your brief question. Prince Turki, you get to decide.
Okay. Start from the right. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Prince Turki. I'm John Allen from the World Policy Institute, and I bring greetings from a longtime mutual friend, Bob McGrath, who unfortunately could not be here with us today.
Please thank him for
the technology, the acceleration of technology, global technology today, would seem to make the nation state not only outmoded, but immoral, as you have so eloquently identified all these nation states and differences. Isn't it time to put aside some of these differences, nation-state differences, and come together as citizens of the world, take off our genders, our religious, our nationality hats, and have global leaders such as yourself come together and begin to identify global problems and global solutions independent of these other categories. Not that we would give them up, but we would rise above that and address them. Because they are so serious now. If you look at terrorism, if you look at nuclear, if you look at global warming.
May I ask what your question is, sir?
Yes, your opinion, please.
I believe the nation-state guarantees peace and security. And therefore, although technology has become what it has become, yet if we don't know who we are, if we don't know what our land is, if we don't know what our culture is, that is more reason, in my view, to be subjected to transnational trends like Fahish is practicing. Fahish's call is to remove all borders between the Muslim people. Iran's interference in Arab affairs is based on its view that it has a right and an obligation to cross its borders and interfere in Iraq, in Syria, in Bahrain, in Yemen, etc. So without these borders, I think we would be more liable to have conflict rather than a peaceful and stable situation in our part of the world. That does not negate the need to come together, and hence my strong support for a much maligned institution, the United Nations. It was established in order to provide the engagement between peoples and cultures, and some of its most successful efforts have been in those linkages that it developed either through UNICEF or through the World Health Organization or through the World Food Program or the World Refugee Institution. They're all supported by the United Nations, and they meet the requirements of having people come together and engage with each other. But to give up the nation state, I think, as I said, will be more conducive to struggle than to have it. Yeah, the lady over there, please.
Hello, I'm Roma Stibravi, president of NGO Sustainability, and we know that peace so much depends on employment. And how is Saudi Arabia diversifying its economy, and particularly how is it dealing with the climate change issues there?
Saudi Arabia has signed on to the recent climate agreement, the Paris Agreement, and I read in the papers a couple of days ago that it has been ratified. So the kingdom has been one of the first countries to ratify that agreement. And definitely the climate issue is not particular to one country or to one region, but it affects us all. And in the kingdom, the use of alternative sources of energy is a much supported endeavor. We have begun to consume much of our own oil and gas resources for our own purposes. And in that context, the kingdom has embarked on a program of diversifying our energy sources by using solar, of which we have abundant resources, and also wind and nuclear energy. And in that context, we have established an institution and a department in the kingdom that deals with these renewable and atomic energy issues. And it is not just there, but we're also engaged in efforts to improve the carbon emissions from hydrocarbon sources. The CAPSARC, the kingdom's main research institution that deals with energy and with fossil fuels, is undertaking research in cooperation with other countries to diminish the carbon emissions from fossil fuels. One of the things that many people don't realize, and something that I have been talking about frequently, is that a barrel of oil can produce literally thousands of byproducts through refinement. And those byproducts can be used not just in terms of the carbon fabrics that come from them, but they're already being used in medicines, in food, and other such enterprises. Imagine if we didn't have to burn that barrel of oil and concentrated on producing all of these 1,000 products from it. That, to me, would be a major plus for us in Saudi Arabia by conserving our oil in order to break it down into its components of the particles that will make these wonderful products that will come in the future. And I hope it will come sooner than later. So we're not afraid of the future when oil is not burned anymore. Rather, we think of it as a boon that will allow us to use our oil resources to make all these wonderful byproducts that come from it. Yes, ma'am.
Please wait for the microphone.
Pardon?
You have it?
You mentioned increased bullying in the area, in the region, as a direct result of the Iran nuclear deal. Could you give examples of that?
I can't hear your question.
Am I speaking?
Well, just look what's happening in Syria.
Can you repeat the question, please, Prince Turki?
The question is, what are the examples of Iran's bullying after the deal, the nuclear deal? What is happening in Syria today? You have literally thousands of Iranian troops deployed. And you have, in addition to that, militias that Iran established in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in Iraq, Asa'ib al-Haq, and others like it. And they're bringing recruits from Pakistan, from Afghanistan, from all over the world to do what in Syria? To kill Syrians. And that, if that is not bullying, I don't know what is. But it doesn't stop there. Their activities in Yemen are equally bullyish. Their support for the Houthis, who have, as I mentioned in my presentation, have occupied by force the capital of the country and driven out its legitimate government from the capital. If that is not bullying, I don't know what is. And so on. So these are the specific bullying actions that Iran has taken not because of the deal, but because of its, as I said, transnational ambitions. It feels it has a right to interfere in our affairs, even though it has its own borders, it has its own interests, it has its own identity, and so on. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Susan Sinterhofer, My name is Susan Sinterhofer. Thank you for your very interesting speech today. My question is, some of us are very surprised that Donald Trump won today. None of us know very much about his foreign policy. I hope he takes you up on your offer to visit you. If he were to do that, and you were able to have a conversation with him, what advice would you give him? How would you want him to run American foreign policy over the next 2 years in your region? How could he be helpful? And what would you say to him?
First of all, I would say to the president-elect that you have friends as the United States in our part of the world. Engage with us. Discuss with us mutual benefits and interests on the issues that face us. Palestine is an example. Find a solution to what is already known to the rest of the world, and even to both parties, the Palestinians and the Israelis. They both say they want a two-state solution, publicly. Take them to task. Let them work for that, and not simply say, oh, it's up to you guys to fix it between yourselves. They will not do that. And we, as your friends in the area, will help you in achieving that peace. There is the Arab Peace Initiative that Saudi Arabia presented in 2002. It is still on the table. And as far as I can tell, it is the most equitable and still the most viable quid pro quo solution to the situation between Israel and Palestine. The whole world has accepted that, including the US government. Israel has not. So you have to convince the Israelis to engage with the rest of the Arab world on that basis. On Syria, as I mentioned in my presentation, there has to be a balance of power between a government that is killing its people with aircraft, missiles, barrel bombs, poison gas, and a people who have no means to defend themselves against these onslaughts. But not only does that government use these forces against them, it brings in allies to help it kill more Syrians. The Russians are doing it, and the Iranians, and as I mentioned, their subsidiary allies like Hezbollah and the other militias from Iraq and other places. These are things I think that would go a long way to bring stability and peace in our part of the region. Yes, sir.
Hi. Well, first I wanted to thank you for your very interesting lecture, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have heard it. My question is in regards to Syria. If you could speak to Donald Trump about it, what would your advice be in terms of what do you think the United States should do sort of to try and alleviate the conflict? Because it's been going on for 5 years, lots of violence and killing. Would you advocate more direct intervention by maybe the U.S. and its allies to counter Iranian intervention and Russian intervention, or would you just advocate more refugee acceptance, or both?
Well, I will continue from the previous question and say that in Syria particularly, which I think you were referring to, let's see what Russia is doing. Russia has brought in Air Force and other armed material and advisors and so on, and they say that they brought it there in order to fight the terrorists. But whom have they been bombing? They've been bombing hospitals, they've been bombing schools, they've been bombing civilians. And every time I would suggest to Mr. Trump that Russia bombs a hospital in Aleppo or Idlib or any other place, that the US bomb a Syrian army camp. Make it equal, so that the Russians know and Assad knows that for the suffering that they inflict, there will be retribution. That is one way, I think, that you can even the odds in Syria and force the Russians to be helpful in achieving a ceasefire, a real ceasefire, not like the one reached in Vienna last year and in Geneva at the beginning of this year. We want a real ceasefire. We want an end to the fighting. And with all of the armaments deployed there by the Russians, by the Iranians, by the Americans, by the Saudis, by the Turks, by the Europeans, you can enforce a ceasefire on the ground. But that has not happened. Yes, sir.
Joel Rogers from NYU. I have a very simple question with regard to the Houthis and the geography. Why wouldn't an embargo and a partial or total air and naval blockade keep them from getting arms?
Where?
In Yemen.
In Yemen. Well, Yemen has a seacoast that is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, over 1,500 kilometers long. And the ability to police all that distance is not available. So smuggling into the Yemen is one of the ways that arms are being brought to the Houthis. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Ellen Gorman from New York City, and I'd just like to ask, is Saudi Arabia taking in Syrian refugees? And what is Saudi Arabia's plan for the refugees that it cannot take in?
As I mentioned in my presentation, since 2011, Saudi Arabia has admitted into its borders 2.5 million Syrians. But we don't consider them as refugees. Those who want to stay in the kingdom have been given residency permits. Those who have chosen to leave have sought their means of leaving by getting visas from other countries, and they have left. Of those 2.5 million, the latest figures I heard was that nearly just over 500,000 of them have chosen to stay in Saudi Arabia, not as refugees, but as registered residents in the kingdom. Yes, sir. Is that a sir or a ma'am? Sorry. My eyesight is not very good.
I'm sorry for that. Thank you so much for your thoughtfully generous words today. I'm a founding member on the United Nations NGO Health Committee, and certainly over the years that we've been in existence, a little more than 20 years, we have worked with various refugee populations throughout the world, for example, those in the Central African Republic. I know you have very deep concerns and worries about your Syrian refugees, and I was wondering if you've had any participation or help from such entities and organizations as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Médecins Sans Frontières, and even perhaps the World Health Organization, and certainly for the children, UNICEF. Thank you.
The kingdom has a very expansive and extensive aid program, humanitarian aid program. Directly, we are funding refugee camps in Jordan and in Lebanon and even in Turkey. And we've also helped in Iraq for those who have been displaced by the fighting in Iraq. We also cooperate with the United Nations agencies that deal with these groups. So yes, there is a very active Saudi engagement with help for refugees.
How about questions from the students or West Point cadets?
Yes.
Any?
I was just pointing to someone there.
Hello, I'm on, right? Hi, thank you so much for giving this fascinating presentation. I have a question about Yemen. So for the sake of this question, can we just assume that Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Arabian supported government will take back the territory controlled by the Houthis? Is there a specific Saudi plan for rebuilding the country and reducing the risk of sectarian conflict?
Yes, there is. The kingdom, with its coalition allies, have developed post-conflict plans for help in the Yemen. As I mentioned in my presentation, Saudi support for Yemen has been ongoing for the last 4 or 5 decades. And we have a track record of implementing support for the Yemeni people. As a matter of fact, even during this conflict, there is Saudi help going through the King Salman Center for help to the Yemeni people in the form of foodstuffs, medicines, shelter, etc. But we need to stop the fighting. And in order to do that, the missing part from Resolution 2216 that was passed by the United Nations Security Council was a monitoring and policing mechanism to make sure that that resolution is implemented. So every time there has been talk between the various factions on a ceasefire, it is never respected because there is nobody there to police the ceasefire. And I think that is one thing that hopefully Saudi Arabia will work with its allies, including the United States, in establishing in the Yemen. When Secretary Kerry visited last month in the kingdom and met with the Saudi foreign minister and with the United Arab Emirates foreign minister and with the British foreign minister, they agreed on a plan for achieving a ceasefire. Implementing it has been a difficulty because of the lack of the policing mechanism. So I hope that that will be undertaken. West Point cadets, anyone for the question?
Cadet Andrews, class of 2018.
Voice.
Good? Okay. Class of 2018. Sir. Closer? Better? All right.
Yeah.
Good. Sir, in one of the articles that I read before this brief, I read that Saudi Arabia is talking to Russia about possibly making oil deals. This might go against the oil sanctions created after the Crimea events. How do you think that might unfold?
Can you?
How the Saudis and the Russians may be working together to develop oil fields.
I don't know if there is work to develop oil fields, but there is cooperation in discussions to meet the challenge of the low oil prices. Russia is not a member of OPEC, which Saudi Arabia is. And so the kingdom has reached out beyond OPEC to Russia to help in stabilizing first the oil prices, and secondly, to find a way of bringing them up so that they get to a level that is not just acceptable to the producers, but also acceptable to the consumers. And I think at the last OPEC meeting, there was consensus on certain production cuts by not just OPEC members, but also by non-OPEC members, including Russia. And that is where I think the kingdom is working with Russia. If there is any cooperation on developing oil fields, I don't know about it. Yes, sir.
Daniel Wagner from Risk Cooperative. My question has to do with a proposal that has been made by the president-elect, which is rather interesting and also controversial. It has to do with the idea of fighting Daesh in Syria with Russia. It seems to me this is really interesting because it talks to the need for thinking outside the box and creating new alliances to fight a common enemy, which is also an enemy of Saudi Arabia. Would you recommend participating in such an endeavor, and would you also recommend participating in other alliances designed to fight Daesh?
We will do whatever is necessary to fight this scourge that I mentioned in my presentation, whether it's with the Russians, with the Iranians, with anybody. We'll be willing to work to put a stop to their vicious activities. We will need to see what specific proposals Mr. Trump can come up with in cooperation with the Russians to do that. One other aspect I think that Mr. Trump should press on the Russians is that if you look statistically at how much terror been implemented by Fahish, and I prefer to call it Fahish, and I wish you would too, in Syria, and compare that on a list of activity of Bashar al-Assad and how much terror he inflicted on the Syrian people, I think the balance is very much in Assad's favor. So while we're fighting Fahish and need to fight it and eradicate it, I think there is an equally obligatory decision needed to fight the terror that al-Assad is inflicting on his people. And that's where I think there might be a difficulty in getting the United States, which is fighting Fahish, but not yet decided to fight Assad, and Russia, which is claiming to fight Fahish, but is actually bombing the non-Fahish opposition to Assad and innocent Syrian civilians, and also is in support of Assad. How do you square that circle? It's going to be something for Mr. Trump to figure out. Let's see, lady over there. Sorry, my eyesight is very, very bad, so it is a gentleman.
I'm Tyler Beebe. As you know, the young crown prince has implemented some very aggressive and proactive economic and social initiatives in Saudi Arabia. Do you think, A, they will be, for the most part, successful? B, has he pushed a little bit too far, too fast? And as an adjunct to that question, how many years will it take Saudi Arabia to significantly reduce its dependence on oil and natural gas?
The 2030 vision, as it was announced a few months back in the kingdom, is the if you like, not only the idea and the concept of the king himself. And he designated the deputy crown prince to implement it. And I would describe that decision as being bold rather than the word that you used for it. So that is one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is that, as the vision says by the numbers in it, 2030, hopefully by that year, 2030, we will have embarked on our way to replace oil as a main source of income for Saudi Arabia through various other enterprises. And let me just give you one example. Minerals in Saudi Arabia, they're boundless minerals, gold, phosphates, you name it, silver, even uranium. And developing those resources is part of Vision 2030. Railway transportation is a huge ambition in Saudi Arabia. Already under construction, we have 3 different railway systems. There is what is called the Holy Cities Railway that connects Mecca and Medina with the port city of Jeddah. This is a circuitry railroad system that covers something in the circuit of it of about 1,000 miles of railway track and service between these 3 cities. There is the North Center Railroad, which is already under construction and supposed to come on stream next year. This ties the furthest northwest corner of Saudi Arabia on the border with Jordan with the center of Saudi Arabia by passing through various towns and cities like Hayl, Qasim, Taif, etc., reaching Riyadh, and then connecting with the existing railway system from Riyadh to the eastern province. That is a railroad system of about 1,000 miles. Already there is in place a minerals deposit railroad, if I can call it. It is dedicated to transporting the phosphate raw materials from the northwest in Saudi Arabia to the Gulf in the east. And that is a railway system that is about 1,500 kilometers long. So just by implementing these railroad systems in the kingdom, you will develop and ignite the not only ancillary industries that service these railway networks, but also the job opportunities that are going to come with them once they are implemented. Tourism is another aspect of Vision 2030, where the kingdom is already embarked on developing tourist services. And we have various sites that are considered valuable in terms of tourism that are going to be part of that program. And as you know, the service industry, from your experience here, is the biggest employer in terms of labor and other such considerations. So these are just examples of what is going on and what will come down the stream. Is it ambitious? Yes, it is. But it is not reckless. And definitely, it is something that has inspired enthusiasm among the majority of Saudis. And hopefully, it will be implemented in its time. But we don't consider it to be divine revelation. It is the work of human beings, and if there are mistakes committed, hopefully we will rectify them. And if there are revisions to be done, hopefully we will do them. Yes, ma'am.
Final question.
Your Royal Highness, what I think is important when you mention tourism, that Jewish people of any country, anywhere in the world, if this is their religion, are welcome to your country. I think there are sometimes misunderstandings between the problems with Israel and people of the Jewish faith. And Saudi Arabia, I think, would be welcoming with their tourism, people of Jewish faith.
Thank you very much for that question. It's important because there is a lot of misunderstanding. I am a member of the King Faisal Foundation. It was a philanthropic foundation established by the sons and daughters of the late king when he died. And one of the activities of the foundation is to give what is called the King Faisal International Prize. It is based on the Nobel Prize, and it is given in 5 disciplines: service to Islam, Islamic studies, Arabic studies, medicine, and science. The number of Jewish recipients of that prize is probably the largest in terms of comparison to other faiths or cultures or recipients of the prize, particularly on the science and medical considerations. And every year, the prize ceremony takes place in Riyadh, and the recipients come to Riyadh and are hosted for 2 weeks in Riyadh, not only to take advantage of their expertise during that time, because they give lectures, if they are doctors, then they look at patients, etc. But also the awards ceremony is headed by the king himself. So he gives this prize to all the recipients of that. And as I said, many of them have been of the Jewish faith. Because we don't consider that that should be a stumbling block or a hindrance when we deal with human beings. And visitors to the kingdom of the Jewish faith in the business community, in the diplomatic corps, and various other lines of endeavor are not prevented from coming to Saudi Arabia, either because they're Jewish or Christian or Hindu or any other consideration. And that is just one example of where the kingdom has been in that context. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You've been very gracious. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Prince Turki. We look forward to having you back.